a work session to order at 3:30 p.m. or 3:31 p.m. on Tuesday, October 6, 2020. All work session items listed are for discussion only. No action can or will be taken. The primary purpose of work session meetings is to provide the City Council with the opportunity for in-depth discussion and study of specific subjects. Public comment is not provided for on the agenda. It may be made only as approved by consensus of the Council. In appropriate circumstances, a brief presentation may be permitted by a member of the public or another interested party on an agenda item if invited by the mayor or city manager to do so. The mayor may limit or end the time for such presentations. Our work session today is a review and discussion of the draft reports for development impact fees and wastewater capacity fees. Tishner Bice was hired in October 2019 to perform a development impact fee study for the city of Kingman. A draft of the land use assumptions, infrastructure improvements plan, and development impact fee report and wastewater capacity fee report have been completed and will be presented to the council for review and discussion. Manager Foggin.
Thank you, Mayor. It is absolutely a pleasure to be here with you today, and we welcome everybody that's joining us over the virtual Zoom meeting. So thank you for all of you attending. Just as a kind of introduction, as we embarked on this effort, our goal was to have this work done and the impact fee analysis rolled out and the fees in place by the end of 2020, and I'm happy to report that so far we're on schedule for that. And it has been quite an effort to try to do this, and we've done it all virtually, which has been a little bit of a challenge, but we've muddled through the best that we can. So in just introducing the topic, I would just like to point out that in looking at impact fees, this actually came about as part of a conversation that we had multiple times with the council over the last couple of years about what can the city do to increase revenues. And one of those tools in our toolbox that has been missing since, I think, for this community since 2012 was impact fees. And just as a reminder, impact fees are fees that are collected as part of the growth of our community, so that when new people move into the city, it's really their contribution to the system that helps us add new parks, trails, increase road capacity, as well as the impacts that new homes and businesses have on fire and police capital needs as well. And so in doing that, we've worked with all of our departments that are affected by this. We have taken their assumptions and fed those into the process and have vetted those. So at the end, what you'll see through this presentation is really an effort between all of the departments that are affected by these impact fees. And so with that, really the person that led this project needs to get credit for it is Tina Moline, my finance director. She's done a wonderful job working with the different departments, gathering information, and with our consultant. And so I will turn it over to her to talk a little bit about the effort that she's been involved with, and then introduce our consultant as well. So Ms. Tina.
Thank you, Mr. Foggin. Thank you, Mayor and Council. And so it has been an effort by all of the divisions that are impacted by this, and so I definitely want to give recognition to all of the divisions. It's been a team effort with us in finance, the divisions, as well as, and I want to give a huge shout out to our consultants as well. We've been working with Ben Griffin and Carson Bice, who is with us here this evening, who will actually be covering the assumptions in the report. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Carson. Thank you.
Is this on? Okay. Well, according to this, I've only got 3 minutes to make my presentation. Well, it's my pleasure to stand before you tonight. I'm glad you walked in, sir, because as you can imagine, with these virtual or these socially distanced city council meetings, it's not the same as seeing the sea of faces at the dais. In fact, I was in Iowa 2 weeks ago, and just the mayor was at the dais, and everybody else was to my side and behind me and peppering me with questions from behind. So it felt like they were going to have their own private presentation here. So a little bit, Mr. Foggin stole some of my thunder here with his eloquent definition of impact fee basics, so I'm not going to go over that. But they are one-time charges, okay? So we're not, these aren't annual revenues. But what we're going to talk about tonight is the land use assumptions, the infrastructure improvement plan. You'll hear me refer to that as an IIP. Wastewater capacity fees. I'm going to address why we're calling those capacity fees and not development impact fees, and then go over the fee summary and the adoption timeline going forward. Mr. Foggin mentioned the year 2012, and that was sort of a bellwether year for development impact fees in the state of Arizona because the impact fee enabling statute changed, known as SB 1525. There was substantial changes, which I'll go over a little bit of those now. Not sure why this is happening. Okay, there we go. There are 3 integrated products now required from the state's Development Impact Fee Act. One is a land use assumptions document. The other is the IIP, or the Infrastructure Improvements Plan. And then the third is the actual development fee study. Now, what we typically do is integrate those into one document rather than have 3 separate documents. And it's very difficult to approve an IIP if you don't know what the assumptions within that IIP mean for the fee amount. So that's why we include draft fees within that study. One of the things that the Impact Fee Act changed in 2012 was the definitions and requirements for levels of service. They may not exceed what is provided to existing development. Higher levels of service must be paired with non-development fee revenue, meaning that you have to find a revenue source to make yourself whole. And then they also put significant limitations on what cities and towns can actually collect the development fees for. For instance, you can no longer do general government or municipal facilities development fees in Arizona. They also put limits on sizes for libraries to 10,000 square feet, also limited the size of parks eligible to 30 acres. Related to that, they also, for community centers related to parks and recreation, limited those to 3,000 square feet. Also banned public safety training and some of the other things that are normally seen within the parks category. The adoption process also changed significantly. It's perhaps the most onerous adoption process in the country in terms of the time frame. I think it's 225 days from start to finish. But round 1 essentially is what we're embarking on shortly, and that is the approval of the land use assumptions and the infrastructure improvement plan. And then round 2, we would advertise the actual development fee report, which you then have an opportunity to modify based on round 1 input and discussions, decisions. We also do the revenue projections that are required, as well as the required offsets that may be required as part of the development fees. And I'll talk a little bit about offsets as we go forward here. Now, you also heard Mr. Foggin mention capacity fees. And the reason why we are not adopting or recommending that the city adopt the current water development fee or impact fee as a development impact fee is because they're essentially grandfathered under the old Impact Fee Act. And with the new Impact Fee Act, it's much more restrictive in what you can do with the fees. And so you're better off using another portion of the statute, which is related to water and sewer charges, because you do collect fees from development outside of the city. And this, by keeping it a capacity fee, it will allow you to continue to do that into the future. Differences compared to development fees, as I mentioned, allows fee collections outside the city limit. Also a much shorter adoption period relative to SB 1525. As you can see here, you just have to adopt a notice of intent by motion at a regular council meeting, advertise the capacity fee report 30 days in advance, and then you can adopt the capacity fees at least 60 days after the adoption of the notice of intent. So let's talk briefly about fee methodologies before we get into the nitty-gritty. The way to think about how you can calculate impact fees is to think of the past, the present, and the future. And when we think about the past, it's essentially new development is buying into excess capacity that a community has provided within its infrastructure system. And it doesn't matter if that was through foresight or a complete accident, it doesn't matter. The capacity is there. We typically see these done most often with utilities. For instance, you may have a wastewater treatment plant that has a capacity of 10 million gallons a day, and it's currently at 6, and so new development is buying into that remaining 4 MGD of capacity. That's not to say that you limit it to utilities. We've also done fees like that for instance, when a community may have just built a new police station 2 years ago, which has been oversized to serve development in the future, you still have got debt on that facility, so we can design the fee to basically recoup new development's pro rata share of that remaining capacity. So that's what we talk about when we call it a buy-in or a cost recovery. That's what we mean. The second method is essentially the present, and it's really a snapshot approach. We call it an incremental expansion approach, sometimes referred to as a consumption-based approach. It's very formulaic in terms of taking a snapshot of what your current infrastructure assets or inventory is today compared to the demand base that it serves. For instance, you've probably heard the Parks Department talk about, our level of service is so many acres per thousand or so many acres per person. That's an example of how we calculate impact fees using that approach. We develop level of service assumptions based on the existing inventories and what they serve today, and then figure out, well, if you were to buy a park acre today, what would it cost? What does it cost to replicate a tennis court, a basketball facility, et cetera? The big benefit to this is that it provides a lot of flexibility for the local government, unlike the plan-based approach, which I'm going to tell you about now, which is really looking into the future. A lot of times we see this done with a utility master plan or a road master plan. It's very popular or more common when you actually have an adopted master plan, and more importantly, you have a funding plan adopted with it, so you know how you're going to make yourself whole. When I said flexibility under the consumption-based approach, what I mean by that is if you were to go forward and adopt a plan-based approach, let's say for parks, based on a master plan, and development doesn't come in the way we projected, you still have to build that CIP. It's just that the revenue's not going to be there. You're going to have to make up the difference from other sources, whereas that consumption-based approach, you're really only obligated to build what you collect because it's formulaic. So if growth is greater than you expected, then you've got the revenue to build more park acres. If it's less, you build less, but you're not on the hook, or the general fund's not exposed. So those are the different impact fee methodologies. We also need to evaluate the need for, this should say offsets, because that's an Arizona-specific word, offsets. It's credits everywhere else. But there's really two types of credits we have to look at. And the reason we have offsets or credits is because we have to guard against new development paying twice, once through the impact fee, and then again through a future stream of revenue, whether it's utility rates, sales tax, property tax, et cetera. So the first credit is site-specific, and that's when a developer constructs all or a portion of facilities that are included in the the fee calculation. And I'm going to use parks again as the example because it's the easiest. Let's just say a developer comes in and as part of their development proposal builds a park or gives you land to build infrastructure or the recreation improvements on. That has to be taken into account, and the city would enter into a development agreement with that developer in terms of how they get made whole, whether it's being paid back through the future stream of impact fee revenue or just a credit for the first so many houses you don't pay the fee, et cetera. But we have to make sure the developer is made whole. Excuse me. The second types of credits we have to look at are basically revenue credits. For instance, if you've got existing debt service and we've done a consumption-based approach, we typically have to give a credit for your existing debt payments or that future stream of principal payments and get a net present value calculation. Also, if you have dedicated revenue sources, A lot of times we see this with roads or parks where there's a adopted sales tax that goes to fund that. We have to give a credit for that within the methodology itself. Excuse me. Let's talk about the land use assumptions. These were developed by our staff as well as conversations with city staff. Now I'm going to show my age and have to get my glasses out. So essentially what we have to do is tell a story through the report that growth has happened in Kingman and that growth is going to continue in the future, and we have to quantify that over at least a 10-year period within the land use assumptions. So we look at resident and non-resident population, housing units, employment, non-residential square footage. If we're doing transportation, we look at vehicle trip generation rates, et cetera. So in our draft document, we are projecting that the resident population increased by almost 6,000 persons over the next 10 years, and that equates to about 2,530 housing units. And as you would expect, given the housing trends here, the lion's share of those units are single family, about 2,440. In terms of employment, we're projecting an increase of about 1,170 jobs. And in terms of non-residential square footage, that equates to about 456,000 square feet of additional non-residential activity, with the majority of that being either institutional uses or retail commercial. Now let's turn our attention to the individual development fee categories. The first is the fire impact fee. We are recommending, given the size of the city and the way that the stations respond, we are recommending a citywide service area. So we're not recommending zones or districts. The components within the fire development fee include the actual bricks and mortar stations, as well as the apparatus, and then the communications center equipment. We're using an incremental or consumption-based approach for this fee category. And when we compare the level of service standards within the impact fees to that development you saw on the previous slide, the future development, we can estimate, well, based on that demand or those projections, how much new infrastructure would it demand? And so based on that, we're seeing a demand for approximately 3,000 square feet of station space. That can be, because of the consumption-based approach we use, the city can choose to build a brand new station. You can add bays to existing stations, et cetera. And the estimated cost would be about $1.2 million. You'd have to buy about 1.5 pieces of apparatus at a cost of $1 million, and then spend about $31,000 on additional communications equipment. And this shows the draft fees, and the way to work your way through this table is the top part of the table shows the different costs, whether it's per person or per job for the non-residential side. And then we look at the different housing unit types and their relative number of persons per housing unit. And then on the non-residential side, you'll see the number of jobs per 1,000 square feet. So when we look at the total cost per demand unit, meaning the cost per person or the cost per job, we can see that the draft impact fee for a single-family unit is about $893, followed by a multifamily at $577, closely followed by mobile home at $547, and then all other units at $372. Now, non-residential development, the greatest fee per 1,000 square feet is for office and institutional uses, or this is actually per square foot, not per 1,000 square feet. But office and other services would be 14 cents a square foot, followed by institutional at 13 cents a square foot. Now, when we look at the parks and recreation development fee, again, this is a citywide service area we're recommending for this fee. We are using that consumption-based approach or incremental expansion approach here. The components include park land as well as park improvements. And when we compare the level of service standards to the projected residential and non-residential development, we have demand for 23 acres, totaling $2.3 million, and about $2.7 million in growth-related park improvements to that land. And when we look at the draft impact fees for Parks and Rec, same approach as you saw for fire. Single family has the highest fee at $1,954 per housing unit, followed by multifamily at $1,262 and mobile home at $1,197. When we look at non-residential development, again, office and institutional generate the highest fee per square foot because they have more employees per 1,000 square feet. And that's another thing I should have pointed out that was unique about the Development Impact Fee Act changes in 2012. We normally don't see parks and recreation or libraries assessed against non-residential development unless there's compelling reasons. And what I mean by compelling reasons is if you're the Silicon Valley jurisdiction and you're a huge net importer of jobs and people stay after work to recreate, it's appropriate to assess a fee. But within the Impact Fee Act itself in 2012, it specifically stated that you had to charge non-residential development for parks and library. And that question comes up quite a bit, so that's the reason why you see a non-residential fee here. So again, office and institutional generate the highest fees per square foot. For the police fee, again, citywide service area, we're using the consumption-based approach again. The components here are police station space, the police vehicles, and communications equipment. The 10-year demand, when we compare that to the land use projections, is about 1,600 square feet of additional police station space at an estimated cost of about $650,000. About $450,000 worth of police vehicles would be demanded, and then about $50K in communications equipment. And the draft impact fees for police, single family generates the highest fee at $413 per house, followed by multifamily at $267, mobile home at $253, and all other units at $172. Unlike the other fees, retail or commercial generate the highest fee per square foot, given the methodology we use that indicates or represents the fact that police services is largely a function of the presence of people, and commercial uses generate consistently higher calls than office and institutional uses. And the street development fee, the citywide service area, the components here, and we're using a consumption-based approach, are arterials that provide additional capacity as well as improved intersections. The 10-year demand is almost 5 lane miles at a cost of about $4.8 million, and almost 4 intersections at a cost of $2.4 million. And when we look at the draft fees, we see a single family fee at about $2,533, followed by multifamily at $1,494, mobile home at $1,626, and all other units at $1,105. From a non-residential perspective, again, commercial and retail uses have higher trip generation rates and consume more roadway capacity than other non-residential uses, so it does have the highest fee per square foot. And finally, wastewater. As we talked earlier, this is being proposed for adoption as a capacity fee rather than a development impact fee, and the service area would be the city as well as those areas outside the city that you serve. The components are treatment, which we have a cost recovery or buy-in component for. The interceptors are done using a plan-based approach, and we also had to include a debt service offset for sewer rate revenue that's used to retire debt. The 10-year demand is about $5.7 million in treatment, about almost $12 million in interceptors, and the discounted credit or offset is about $1.7 million. This shows the capacity fees. You'll notice that this table is slightly different than the tables you've seen for the other fees. The capacity fees would be collected by meter versus by housing unit or per square foot of non-residential development. And the single family unit is pegged as the capacity ratio of 1 that you see in the table, which is a 3/4 inch meter. And that impact or capacity fee, the proposed fee is $3,562, and that is compared to your current single family fee of $1,456. Now, when we add all the fees together, and again, it's sort of an apples to orange approach because we've got the capacity fees, which are done by meter, and the impact fees, which are by unit or per square foot, depending on whether it's residential or non-residential. But the full freight of what I'll just call the general fund related impact fees is $5,793. for a single-family unit, and that includes fire, parks and recreation, police, and streets. For a multifamily home, it's $3,600, $3,623 for mobile home, and $2,463 for all other units. The hotel room is $1,641 per room. And then when we look at the non-residential fees per square foot, commercial is the highest due to public safety and streets at $4.99 per square foot, followed by office and other services, institutional uses, and industrial uses, and also the assisted living is done on a per bed basis. So the total fee, because when we're in these public forums, the focus tends to be on what's the cost for a single family unit. And when you assume that the single family unit is on the 3/4 inch meter, when you add in the $5,793 for the general fund development fees, the $3,562 for the capacity fee, you get a total cost of $9,355. Now, finally, the adoption timeline, which is the part of the process we hope to enter next, is in October, we would advertise the land use assumptions and IIP, and that would be plus our minimum of 60 days. Then in December, there would be a public hearing on the land use assumptions and IIP. January, or after that public hearing, you could adopt at a minimum of 30 days after that. So that would be a January adoption. Then February public hearing on the development fees. Then 30 days from there, or you'd advertise it, the adoption would occur in March. And then once the fees are adopted, there's a 75-day waiting period before those fees can go in effect. So in June of next year, the fees would go into effect if adopted at this timeline. Now, in terms of the capacity fees, it's a much shorter gestation period. You could potentially advertise the capacity fees or that report in October, and then adopt a notice of intention, and then have the public hearing and adoption in March, and the fees go into effect in June to match the development fees. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I know that was a lot to cover in a short time.
Are there questions? Vice Mayor.
Thank you. It appears that all of these development fees are focused on general funded capital projects. Streets, police and fire, public safety, and parks. The general funded stuff where historically this city has had a CIP that has been largely unfunded. Mm-hmm. And so these development fees will be the revenue source to progress that CIP. Is that correct?
One revenue source, but I just want to caution you, development fees are not going to be the silver bullet that saves the city. I mean, you're still going to have to come up with other monies for other types of projects and to correct existing deficiencies. Yes, it could be a significant source of revenue for your CIP. Right.
And they're only applicable to people that live in city limits. We don't get any money from visitors or tourists, which is unfortunate, but is that correct? Only people that
indirectly, because they are staying in hotel rooms and you have assessed.
If someone builds another hotel, then we'll get those monies from the hotelier.
It is not a broad-based revenue
but not
source.
from people that are coming through town or even that live outside of city limits that are using our parks and our police and fire and our streets. Yep. They're still getting sort of a free ride, right? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I call that phenomena shadow citizens. They live right outside your border and act like they live in the city, right?
We have a lot of those.
We have a lot of those.
Yeah, right? I can imagine.
I don't see the Zoom participants. Is there anyone on, any counselors on Zoom that would like to ask questions?
I have none at this time. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. I just have a question about the incremental expansion. I know that we are basing this on that format of improvement, but I was just wondering about our parks, because it seems to me like in the park master plan, it was mentioning our deficiency, and we have deficiencies. And I know that one does not, it says it does not, well, I'll find it in a minute, assumes there are no existing infrastructure deficiencies. And I think we have a sizable one in that area, so this does not actually address that, does it?
Right, but you can't address existing deficiencies with impact fees unless you have a funding source to ameliorate that.
Okay, which
Right.
we don't, but, but I wanted to bring that up
Certainly.
because I don't want, it says, that's the type we're looking at. It assumes no deficiencies, but we all know that there are deficiencies in these other areas. We just don't have the funding source for them at the moment. I think that was my major question. I guess on the water capacity, the fee, that also is a one-time fee,
Yes, ma'am.
but it does not change the existing water bill that people are going to get. They're still going to get the water bill that they normally get, and this is just strictly something that is going to be geared toward future growth.
Right, every time somebody comes in for a new meter, whether it's a commercial project or a residential project, they pay that fee.
Because I think people will wonder that, and this does not add to their monthly bill.
So Mayor, I just want to clarify, it's the wastewater fee, actually.
Wastewater.
And we currently do charge an impact fee for wastewater. We're just changing it now to a capacity fee so that we can charge it outside of city limits, because we're now going to include projects and not just debt in that fee. So I wanted to make sure to make that clear.
So it will change the monthly bill, or just what it's called?
Nope, just whenever you have new development.
Yeah, that's, okay.
Yep.
I think that's going to be some of people's really concerns. So, okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is a really extensive analysis, and yes, Vice Mayor, you
I have
want
just one more follow-up question I thought of. So you work all over the country implementing these types of things. In your experience, when a city adopts something like this, what sort of an impact does it have on economic development, on projects coming, on expansion projects, retention projects? That's really important to me, and I know the council.
Yeah, and good question. We get that all over the place. And, you know, as part of this, what hasn't been mentioned to date is tomorrow we are meeting with the stakeholder group from the home building and other interests. But we have not seen any empirical data that supports the fact that development fees drive away development. If that were the case, we wouldn't have 70 active impact fee jobs right now because everybody would be shut down. It's certainly, and I don't mean to take it lightly, because it does add to the cost of business. And you know, there's always an issue where you've got projects that are in the pipeline that already have their financing lined up, and now you're introducing this fly into the ointment. It's a very complicated economic analysis of who pays the fees, and it depends on the economic cycle that you're in at the time. If we're in a robust economy, if the developers are honest, or the home builders are honest, they will tell you that they are passing the fee 100% onto the home buyer, and may even mark it up because they've got their own carrying charges, right? If we're in a downturn, everybody pays the fee. The person who sells the land takes less per acre, home builder makes less profit, and the fee payer pays or the home purchaser pays a portion of it as well. But I have never seen this, and I've been doing this 30 years, where a community adopts impact fees and development dries up. So.
Well, it's less of a concern now because our industrial park, when you think of industrial development, it's currently outside of our city limits. But it seems strange to me that we would assess, or the city, when they do this, would adopt a parks fee for businesses, if the businesses were in the industrial park inside the city limits, to assess them a parks fee. Police and fire, a case could probably be made for that, probably for roads as well. But the parks was strange, unless there's some sort of a park inside the industrial park or something, right?
Right. I don't disagree, but that's what the statute says.
Yeah.
And I think it's also worth noting that we can't arbitrarily waive or reduce fees, because that violates equal protection. So we just can't say we're going to adopt residential fees but not non-residential fees.
Right.
Or we're going to not charge retail but charge everybody else. But that's not to say that if there are some economic development objectives that the city has in mind that are supported through, policies that are contained in different planning documents or resolutions, et cetera, that you couldn't do an impact fee incentives for economic development projects. The caveat is you would have to find other revenue to make the impact fee plan whole.
Mm-hmm. This question is for Manager Foggin. Manager Foggin, for when you talk about the home builders that are residential home builders here in our area, so after a home builder, they build a house, they sell the house, they make their profit, they go to build the next house. What's the annual maintenance liability for that single house on the city and the citizens for every year after that house is built? Do you know?
So the cost estimates for homes built in a community, depending on whether you're a property tax city or whether you're a property tax city and a sales tax city, we happen to be just a sales tax city, that number ranges anywhere from $35,000 to $100,000, the cost of that home over basically a 30-year period. And so for Kingman, with being a sales tax city only, the cost per home would be somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 for a 30-year life of a home.
What is that, like $1,800 or 15 or
Yeah, I think about between $1,500 and $1,800 a year.
for every year?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a maintenance cost. It has to be covered by the citizens, everybody that lives in city limits, right?
Well, it's
By
for
the city.
us, it's covered by state shared revenue and by
Okay.
whatever sales tax we can make.
Yeah. Yeah. And the cool thing with the sales tax is, as we'd seen in our numbers, only 50% of that cost was borne by our citizens, whereas maybe the other 50% was borne by people that didn't live inside city limits. I understand why we're here today to talk about this, but
Yep.
you gotta cover it. Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any
Mayor,
other questions?
I'd like to ask a question if I could.
Okay, I'm sorry, who is this?
This is Councilor Daly.
Please go ahead, Counselor.
I had a question about, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but could you clarify if a homeowner is upgrading from septic to sewer, would they pay the wastewater fee?
You want me to, that's really a policy issue, but in my experience, yes, if you're moving from septic, even though you have an existing house, most jurisdictions would require you to pay the capacity fee.
And you said that we could change that? Is that what you were just saying?
Well, it depends on how you write the ordinance for exemptions and that kind of thing. But I would argue that if you're adding to the system demand, so you would pay the capacity charge. It's different from an impact fee, where if you have an existing house and are expanding it and the fee is assessed per unit, you're not charged an additional park fee. However, you are now a new utility user, and I would argue you would pay the capacity fee.
So,
Right.
so
That does
Jamie-
make sense. It's just that we have worked so hard to get people to switch over to sewer, and I would hate to see this hold them back from that. So thank you.
So Counselor, just so everybody's clear, everybody within the city limits that changes from a septic system and ties into the sewer system is currently paying the current impact fee for sewer.
Can you tell me what that is?
$91 per drainage fixture unit. It's $91 per drainage fixture unit, Councilwoman.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So could you address the issue of impact fees as they relate to expansion of units that exist already, or whether it's business or residential?
Yeah, another excellent question. Now, since the fees are calculated per unit, and we didn't do them by size, It's, you really, so essentially the residential units, if they are expanding, they wouldn't pay an impact fee, even if you're doubling the size of the house, because it's on a per unit basis. However, from a non-residential perspective, if you are increasing the intensity of the use, for instance, for public safety and roads, the fee is higher for retail. So if you're taking a building, let's say it's vacant now, it was an office use, and you're going to expand that building and it's going to be retail, you would pay the difference between the office and the retail, is normally how most ordinances are written.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, that actually brings up a good point that is also worth pointing out, and that is if, for instance, if someone buys a house in the older part of town, tears it down, and wants to build a new home, because that home was already, the old home was connected to the system, there would be no impact fees charged to that home replacing it, as an example.
Okay.
So we often get that question, and just want to make sure that we were clear about that.
What about construction of in-law units?
Construction of-
Or in-law units, if someone has the zoning ability to, do we
Right.
have in-law units connected by a,
Again, these are questions that would be addressed in the ordinance from the sort of the
Okay.
administrative side of things, but 95% or more of the jurisdictions would assess the in-law unit a multifamily impact fee, because it is a net new unit.
okay, makes sense. Any other questions?
This is Counselor Staley. I'd like to ask one more question.
Please go ahead, Counselor Staley.
And this might be a question for Ron, I'm not sure, but one of the complaints that I've heard about previous impact fees is that they were not charged consistently across the board. And one example would be a retail space, a large retail that was expanding, and they posed it as adding office space, so they got the lower office rate when really they were just expanding their retail business. And so I know that there's a lot of heartburn in the community over those reduced fees for certain people. How are we going to make sure this is consistent and everybody's treated fairly?
Actually, that's a great question, and I've heard of those stories. And I think it becomes critical that when our building official and our people are reviewing plans, that they're being fair and honest with what is being proposed. And it really is, it's vital that we continue to do check-ins on impact fees, and that we're holding ourselves accountable making sure that we're looking at them, that we're talking about them. One of the things that is always, that you've heard me talk about with a lot of other things, impact fees are no different, is the importance of being fair and consistent across the board. And one of the things as a city manager that I will tell you is that although you can make deals, development agreements that may fudge with or may impact or reduce impact fees, as was pointed out, you have to be able to show that you're going to be able to replace those impact fees with other revenue. Other than that, as a city manager, I would tell you that I would never recommend that you waive impact fees or that you take a lower amount, because the system impact is there. And so that business, that development is impacting your system, and anytime you go without impact fees, your system suffers from that. And that would be the same as assessing retail, business, office space impact fees. You're only hurting the city, and you're only hurting the ratepayers on the utility side. And the other piece is that, and the reason why we're talking about this, is that sales tax is falling short for capital. And so anytime that you forgive some of these impact fees, you're basically acknowledging that you're going to have new growth not pay for its way in the system. And so for me, it's critical that we be fair and consistent, and if it's retail space, we charge retail per square footage. And that I'll tell you right now, there's a temptation for administration and for the elected officials when they get a business that they really, really want. That's the first thing that's the first conversation that you get is how can we skirt or how can we make an exception for these folks, and everybody else pays the full freight. And I would say that you need to figure out a different way to make it attractive, because you end up with people really being upset, and there's a consistency there that we absolutely have got to be cognizant of.
Thank you.
Thank
Mary.
you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So, Mayor, I would just
ahead.
say that and echo what Tina had started the meeting with regards to thanking Tischler Beach for the excellent work that they've done. The team has really contributed. We've asked them to go back, reevaluate several times to make sure that we have the information correct. I've been through several of these impact fee changes over the years, and I'm really grateful that we're going to be able to do a stakeholder meeting with the home builders and developers and other interested parties. I will say that from my experience, that home building associations in the states that I've been part of, and I don't think it's any different for Arizona, is that the home building association has acknowledged the need for impact fees. Where you end up getting, I'll say your tail twisted a little bit is in the assumptions. And I know that, for instance, the cost of infrastructure starts to become kind of the debated item. And you start getting questions like, does it really cost that much to build a soccer field? I mean, heaven's sakes, it's flat ground where you just plant grass and do sprinklers. Now, unfortunately, soccer fields, for those that play soccer and those that coach soccer, it's just not that simple. And so, as the council hears, or is approached by people, as you hear from people in the development and building community, it'll be the assumptions, I think, for the most part, that you hear. You will hear from people who are just like, we don't want any of these impact fees, but that has not been the approach from, like I said, home builders associations have supported impact fees, but they've supported good, well documented and well vetted impact fees, because growth absolutely has an effect on the community. And if we want to see added parks, we want to see new trails, we want to see widened streets that are over congested with cars, we're going to have a revenue stream, at least a portion of a revenue stream, to take care of those things. It is not the silver bullet. It's a mechanism to help fill in some of the blanks, recognizing that we still are going to have some difficult conversations or tough conversations about revenue sources for this community and what people are expecting. But the one thing, Mayor, you pointed out, the Parks Master Plan. And the Parks Master Plan does point out a number of deficiencies in what we know as underserved areas. And in being able to address some of those needs, our park impact fees will help us. Will it help us take care of old playground equipment? Nope, it will not. Will it help us expand sizes of playgrounds? Yes, it will. It'll play a part in that. And, as we've been, one of the things that we've been talking about over the last couple of years is the donation of the Sunbelt Park property to the city and having that become a soccer complex. And we have some money in place from previous park impact fees to be able to start the work on that. But when that's done, everybody asks the question, what happens, where do you get the rest of the money? And it leaves us kind of going, we don't know. So, moving forward with impact fees ends up being a piece to the puzzle that I think that we're missing. And we've tried to be as fair and consistent with the assumptions as we can be. But that's where I would expect the questions from the home builders and developers to come from, is, other than saying we just don't want them, and that that could be the case. It usually is in some of the assumptions that have been made, and I think that's at least my experience with them. And I've sat in meetings over the years where builders and developers and homeowners, our Home Builders Association and other professional organizations have acknowledged that impact fees are important. It's just, did you do your analysis right, and did you get your assumptions right? And that's over the next couple of months. That's what our purpose is to make sure that we're taking all the feedback, so that when we come back, share that and ask for the adoption, that we know where all the pinch points are. And if we couldn't defend the assumptions, that gives us an opportunity to relook at them. So.
Thank you for that discussion. I understand that. I think it's a healthy discussion to question the basis and the assumptions. I mean, even in looking through this, when I saw the estimate for the fire station, I was like, is that enough? I don't think that's enough to really do a good bang-up job fire station in the East Bench, but I know you thought about it. And then I saw that it was broken into the facility and the equipment and the other things, and it made sense to me then. And so I hope in that kind of discussion that people will understand the depth of what you've really looked at here, because it's a very excellent analysis. This discussion has gone on for years on how to fund capital improvements. I think that's what you were alluding to, that we've had other attempts to find a way to fund capital projects, and the one we tried a couple of years ago didn't work. This year we were prepared to go to ballot with a few measures, and then the pandemic, and so that was kind of put to the wayside for now. But this, we've been steady since we started this in 2019 to look at this seriously, because we have to have some way to fund capital and growth. The city is prepared to grow. We're so fortunate that way. And so we must have the resources to assist developers and the people who live here to have a quality experience. So I'm very glad to see this move forward. I expect, going to your point, Manager Foggin, that there'll be a further discussion in our next budget session, going back to some of the discussions that we had earlier this year to examine the time frame for when they make sense again. But this is a critically important piece at this point to help us grow successfully and for the city to be able to fund capital projects to grow, in my opinion. So thank you. I appreciate it very much. Yes, Vice Mayor.
Manager Foggin, do you have in any other communities that you've heard, or with other city managers that you talk to, when a city adopts something like this, does it have the effect of pushing development outside of the municipal boundaries? What have you heard about that?
I've not seen impact fees retard growth, and the cost to build outside the community Kingman in general is unique. I've not seen a community grow up around a community like Kingman has. So, but to answer that question, I've not seen where communities are next to each other, and one community has an impact fee of, I don't know, 15,000, and community B has an impact fee of 9,000. I've not seen that everybody goes to community B because the impact fees are $6,000 less. So,
I'm sorry, didn't have my mic on. I won't be here when these are adopted, but sort of my concern would be when you look, you know, our population in the city limits is maybe a little over 30,000 or so.
Yep.
And when you add in, you know, New Butler, Kingman, and Val Vista, Golden Valley, all these other communities that are surrounding us, you probably have another at least 30,000 that are coming in and doing shopping. You know, what are these people that live outside? When they come in, they use the general funded stuff, right? The roads. If they get into a fender bender, or if they have a medical emergency, maybe our police and fire. And if they want to use and recreate in our parks. So really the sales tax was the fairest way to allocate the cost of progressing those general funded capital projects. It's just anybody that comes in and uses those things, then you kick in.
Right.
I understand, you know, that this is something that maybe is necessary to look at. I would think that it almost emphasizes an annexation plan. I mean, you got to look and see, as you mentioned, it's unique here, and we have 30,000 and another 30-something thousand outside, just immediately outside of the city. What is it going to do to development patterns? And if the people outside the city are getting a free ride, essentially, it's just a really interesting set of questions.
Yeah, and you know, in response to that, you know, there's the city services that we're looking at, you know, as far as living inside a community, the opportunity to go to a park when you move here. You know, if you choose to live outside the city limits, that, you know, there's county parks, but they're regional in nature, right? So the park system that's within the city, you know, being able to walk to that park or bike to that park is really, you know, these are things that people, as they move to the community or move around inside the community, these are questions they've got to ask themselves. How close do you want to be to a fire station? And do you want to live in a community that is ISO rated, where your fire insurance, your homeowner's insurance is cheaper because we have that as part of the offerings. Our police department is now currently accredited. Where and how close is a police officer for a citizen within the city versus waiting for a sheriff's deputy outside in the city limits? These are all things that people have to factor in, and I would suggest that if impact fees are the leading factor to you making a decision to live outside the city limits, money is probably a problem for you, and you know, knowing what property goes for inside the city limits and property outside the city, maybe having to drill a well, you know, all of the, you know, the cost of development inside the city versus outside is not apples to apples. And I don't, like I said, I don't think that the impact fees are going to all of a sudden require or make people want to live outside the city, because there's just services you're going without, or watered down services that people have come to appreciate. So
Anything else? Thank you so very much for this presentation. And so this timeline that you've given us starts, it says October, advertised land use assessments, assumptions, and the IIPs. Is that going to take an action of council, which we can't do right now?
no, actually, we've started the clock. That's advertising that we have the plan. developed. Yeah,
This is October,
yeah,
October 6th to be exact,
Yeah.
and so.
So, and there's,
So when I see the plan, I'm thinking, okay, we're there.
yeah, well, we have to take public input. It has to be, let's
Okay,
just,
so you
for
have
lack of a better word,
advertised.
it's got to stew for a little while, take public comment, and then it comes back to the council in December.
Okay, we'll have a public hearing then.
Yep.
And then the council will make a decision in January.
Yeah,
Okay, that sounds like a plan. And that's why you're having the meeting tomorrow, because it's been advertised and they already have it, and so everybody knows
Yep.
what's going on.
and then we'd have a second public hearing. There's
In
some,
February.
yeah,
And then adopt the actual fees in March, if the council does that. Okay, thank you so much. I think it's clear, and let's move forward, and good luck with the meetings. We really appreciate it. I've learned a lot today.
yeah,
So
Mayor,
thank-
just one last thing. We'd offered 2 meetings tomorrow and asked people to sign up for them. We only had 1 person sign up for 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, and that person's been contacted, and so it will only be the 9 o'clock meeting. That was the interest by the stakeholders. So we will have that 9 o'clock. The 4 o'clock was offered. There were no takers, and so just as a reminder, we will be, tomorrow's meeting will be on camera and will be viewable as well, so.
Good to know. Then I'm going to adjourn this work session, and we will reconvene at 5 o'clock for the regular session of council. Thank you.